I would say today, if any one of you are CEOs of a company, please make sure to do 3 things. Mission critical jobs, put your best people in those mission critical jobs. Number 2, assess the potential of your best people and then give them broadening assignment. Because if you start broadening them, they will fulfill their potential. If you don't broaden them, they become very narrow. They cannot embrace the growth mindset. The worst thing that can happen to them, they play the role of diminishing. And the other thing is that they will leave, and such a loss of talent.
Welcome to the Game of Impossible podcast. My name is Leon and this is my dad, Idris Jala. We are a father and son podcast where we discuss all things transformation through the lens of business, leadership, sport, and faith. Today, we are continuing in our series, part 2 of our series on career progression. In week 1, we talked about career progression from the standpoint of the individual.
Yep.
How can we, as you say, be the CEOs of our own growth, take responsibility for our own progression? But today, in part 2, we're going to discuss career progression, but from the standpoint of what leaders, what companies can do to ensure that we have the right environment for people to be able to progress, for people to be able to grow. And I think one way that I'd like to propose that we frame growth is by looking at growth as being multipliers as opposed to diminishers. And I think this applies both to contributors, so people who are under leadership, but I think also for leaders as well. If you are in a position of authority, in a position of leadership, how do you lead from a place of multiplication as opposed to a diminisher that diminishes the talent of your teams? This is a concept that is borrowed by someone called Liz Wiseman, who wrote extensively about this. And she determines, in terms of leadership style, a multiplier is someone who challenges and also stretches others, whereas a diminisher micromanages and controls decisions. In terms of impact on teams, a multiplier amplifies a team's intelligence, makes them smarter, whereas a diminisher reduces them to simply order takers. The third thing is in terms of delegation style. A multiplier gives ownership and expects growth, whereas a diminisher hoards responsibility, solves everything themselves. In terms of risk attitude or attitude towards risk, then a multiplier allows room for mistakes and learning, whereas a diminisher focuses on punishing errors and as a result stifles experimentation and innovation. In terms of communication, a multiplier encourages debate and divergent thinking, whereas a diminisher values alignment over curiosity. And then lastly, through the lens of legacy, then a multiplier, they aim to grow future leaders, whereas the diminisher creates dependence on themselves. So I think that is the lens through which we can discuss some practical principles for today. You have a few kind of rules that you talk about. Your first rule is the importance of clarifying vision as well as direction. What does this mean and what does this look like?
Yeah, that's a very important rule, Leon. In my view, when I link back to your point about multiplier, in Microsoft, what Satya Nadella is doing is clearly he is a multiplier. He says for Microsoft, the vision in Microsoft is, he says, to empower every person and every organization on the planet to be able to achieve even more. So this is not just multiplying for performance within Microsoft, but every individual and every organization in the planet. That's the mission of Microsoft. So they really want to become the multiplier of the world. And so they relentlessly do this at their town hall meeting. They have a robust discussion how the things that they're doing in Microsoft is really enabling them to achieve the mission for the world. That really is a classic example of a company that has taken the idea of multiplier to the hilt. And that's the wonderful. In the time I was in H.A.I.R, returning to the point, we have been relentless about our annual appraisal. Every time in H.A.I.R, it's been made very, very clear to everybody that this is the what we want to do for the year, and this is how your part is being played in doing this. So it is very clear throughout. So the organization clearly define what the targets are, and people then know what part they have to play, because there's a cascade of the target right from the very top to the operating companies, to the division, to the individual. So the cascade is a very important one. So when you do a cascade in terms of KPI from the top right to the bottom, people know the parts they have to play. And if you don't know the parts you have to play, then you cannot play that game.
Yeah.
It is very important. I mean, a few years ago, I'm co-chairman of Sunway, and we mentioned it in previous episode. I had a discussion with our chairman, which is Dato Sri Idris Jala, the founder. The observation I made was, for 10 years, our profit before tax remained stagnant between 800 to 900 million ringgit per year, and has not gone past that. For 10 years, it was flat. So we decided to do something completely different. And so we did this about 3 years ago, and we did what's called 3X. So we made it very explicit. We said we want to increase the profit before tax, makes times 3, triple by the year 2030. And of course, everybody said it's a game or impossible, it cannot be done. And the interesting thing was, because we knew that is the true north, and we made it so public, we identified the initiatives that will help drive that. There were 70 initiatives that we identified that will drive that and really move the needle to achieve the 3X target. And we then publicly announced who they were. They were mission critical jobs. And so it was very clear. We told everybody, every single one of you who have been identified to lead this is mission critical. And so we made sure the best people are holding those jobs, and they are going to be monitored. And we had a team that monitored the progress on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing, Leon, is that you look at it, how what has happened. Last year, our target was 1.2 billion ringgit profit before tax target, which is never achieved before. But what did we get? 1.52 billion ringgit. And this is actually more than the trajectory to reach as our 3X target by the year 2030. And why did we succeed in doing? Because rule number 1, we were very clear about the true north measures, and it's quantified. And rule number 2, we also identified the 70 initiatives, and we put people in mission critical jobs. I really want to say today for all listeners, if you're CEO, if you're clear about your targets and you're clear about the priorities that drive the target, you should put the best people in your mission critical jobs. And if you can do that, normally in large companies, I would say there are only about 30 to 100 mission critical jobs. Other than top management, these are, in fact, Singapore Airlines, they do this. When I was in Malaysia Airlines, I met up with the CEO of Singapore Airlines. They are really serious about mission critical jobs. So I asked him, tell me, in your view, which are the mission critical jobs in Singapore Airlines? He was very clear. It was the cabin crew trainers, mission critical, the route planners, he says, and the customer experience managers and the pricing managers. These are mission critical, he said. Others are important, but they are not mission critical for what we're trying to do here. So they put their very best people to do that job. And so I think it's very important for any organization, when you are clear about your targets, you bet your best people. And because you get your best people, and to your point, the people you put there are multipliers, because they then leverage the other people in the team to then produce better results, because they are then like the catalyst in the cog, making things really move and happen. So I think it's very, very important to do that.
Because there'll be people who are listening to this who are not in positions of leadership. So to the leaders, we are saying it's good to clarify your vision, because the clearer you are about your vision, the clearer you'll be about determining what your mission critical areas are. And the greater clarity we have on that, the more clarity we will then have in terms of who are the people that will serve in these mission critical roles.
Yeah.
So the benefit to you, if you are one of those players in the game, I think you can start to ask yourself, well, does my management, does my organization have a clear sense of direction? Because the clearer the direction is, then the higher the likelihood, if you are a high performer, then the higher the likelihood that you will be placed into the right team.
Absolutely.
Versus an organization that doesn't have a clear kind of goal, then I think that is where a lot of people find themselves in either periods or just long seasons of stasis where they just feel like they stagnate because they're not being fully tapped into that, or rather the organization isn't fully tapping into their full potential. So I think that's also a good thing to note. If you're in an organization, look out for clarity of vision for your own sake as well, to ensure that you will then be able to be matched into the right roles, into the right mission critical areas. The next thing that you talk about is your second rule, which is about, and I think this is interesting, the second rule about assessing potential, competence, and performance annually. Now, most people, I think, are in the habit of generally looking at competence as well as performance. I mean, competence is something that is determined at the interview. From when you do your interview, that is an assessment of competence before you get the job. And then on the job, obviously, performance is measured. Now, different companies do it at different intervals. Some people only do it on an annually basis. Some do it on a quarterly. Some even do it on a monthly basis. But the thing that is interesting here, and we've kind of talked about this before, is potential assessment. You have experienced this in H.A.I.R,
Yeah.
and I think that's quite an interesting system. Maybe you can share a little bit how that worked and why it's important.
To your point, Leon, many organizations, I would say 90%, 99% of organizations, they only assess two things. As you say, it's competence and performance, but they don't assess potential.
Exactly.
So in H.A.I.R, we do all three.
Yeah.
And so when you come, during my time when I was in H.A.I.R, if you get interviewed, they will assess you. The question is in the potential assessment is that Leon comes to join H.A.I.R. What do we think Leon's final job it is by the time he retires in H.A.I.R? Does he have the potential to reach the CEO job, or he just going to have the potential to be a manager, or just a department head? So right at that point, we already begin to assess how far you can go. And every year, there's still an assessment of that potential. So every year, they will ask the same question. Leon, we kind of thought that he will become the CEO by the time he retires, but now we change our mind because we do not think he's quite as good as we thought he was before. The CEO material. We look at four things. We call it H.A.I.R as in hair.
Okay.
H stands for helicopter quality. That means the ability of that person to rise above and see the overview. And the helicopter is also has the ability to come down and look at the details. There are a lot of people who get stuck with details, but they are unable to go out and see the vantage point, high vantage point. So people who have high potential are people who have the ability to come up and down. And that's called H.A.I.R quality. And there's, you can ask questions and assess people how quickly they are seeing the overview and details. There are a lot of people who are overview but cannot do details. And you need to have the person that can do the helicopter quality. The second one is called A, analysis. The ability of the person to break down complex problem into its minute parts. If you can break it down, that's the analytical component. And then after you break it down, then you how to integrate it back. That's called analysis, the ability to analyze. And the next one is called I, imagination. This is creativity. How creative is this person? How imaginative is that person looking at the facts to find solutions, to make sure that you get solutions to problems. So imagination is very important. That's why that comes in as the I. The R one is the sense of reality. Some guy who has a lot of imagination, highly creative, but is totally ungrounded. His idea is totally impractical. They are something that belongs to another planet. So the sense of reality is very important. So here, those are the determinants. Many years ago in the 60s, there were two professors in Holland, Van Lennep and Hans Muller. They did a very big study, a longitudinal study of people who have all these qualities. And when they assess the predictor of the qualities for leadership, the ones who go very far, they found the positive correlation in the study is to be 0.87. In statistical terms, that's almost perfect, actually. That means it tells you that if you have those qualities, the H.A.I.R quality is high, it's quite possible, almost sure that you will make it very far in the organization. And that's how we assess that. So every year, we call this, we don't just call it potential, we call it CEP, currently estimated potential.
Yeah.
Because every year you assess it. So every year, if you assess it for 10 years, you keep on saying the same thing about the guy, then it's proven. And the other thing, Leon, is that in the time when you are at Shell, you are posted to many different bosses. And if they are assessed by many different bosses over the same period of time, they conclude unequivocally that you have it, then you know you're there.
That's the potential part.
Yeah.
Now, what about competence? How do we measure competence and performance?
Yeah, competence, for example, if you want to be in Shell, in those days, we have what are the competence required to be a very good petroleum engineer? And they are very specific functional competence. The technical expertise is required. They're very, very specific. And they are graded how good they are doing that. Then there's also the competence is sort about managing people. This is the leadership. So first you have to do managing self. If you cannot manage yourself, then you cannot manage others. Level 1. And then level 2 is managing teams. Then level 3, managing organization. And then level 4 is managing enterprise. So then you have to step people. If you cannot manage yourself, you cannot manage team. And if you cannot manage team, definitely you cannot manage an organization. Can't manage an organization, you can't manage an entire enterprise. So that's how you're going to. So the functional expertise are part of competency. The leadership expertise is another component. Managerial and leadership competence. That's the multiplier. So I think it's very important to do that. There are so many people that only look at competence from the functional, the technical side. They forget about the people side, the managerial side, and then you no wonder you have a problem.
Yeah, and that is how you breed diminishers, actually, because a lot of, like you mentioned, a lot of us, we fall into the pitfall of focusing so much only on the technical competence.
Yeah.
And sometimes when we do that, then the simple byproduct of that is that we naturally promote or elevate people simply based on ability to perform the task and to perform it well. And of course, technical competency and excellence is important. But if we simply elevate someone to, let's say, hold a managerial position, mainly on the basis of their ability to contribute at an individual level, without looking at the leadership skills, then what will happen is that that person, while an excellent contributor, individual contributor, by the time they hit manager position, they will most likely end up being a diminishing manager. They will assume that now that I hold this position, I must therefore control and do more. And not focus on how to build up those under their care.
Yeah. So that moves to the next one. It's called performance appraisal. So on the one hand, you have the potential. If you have a tick, then you have to make sure the person is competent to do the job. And then finally, did they actually deliver it? Did they apply the competency and its potential to make sure that this is really delivered? That's when you look at deliverable. Did the person deliver it? You will find, Leon, there are people even in Shell who have high potential, but they cannot deliver. Then you have to ask a tremendous question about that person's inability, because most of the time we find that these people who are doing that are lazy. They have the potential, but they don't work hard. No industry. Very smart people. But because they're very lazy, but they cannot deliver. So achievement motivation is absolutely key in performance. So we want to see people that can deliver results. So you may have competence, you have tick in the box, everything, knows everything about what is in the book, etc. But that person also have high potential, go straight A, university, etc. But when you cut down to doing it, if the person has no energy, no industry, then you cannot get results. Because I still, at the end of the day, hard work plays a very big part in discipline. So that tripod is very important, that you have to have the three-legged stool: performance appraisal, mass be done together with potential, must be done together with competence appraisal. By the way, Leon, Lee Kuan Yew, the late Lee Kuan Yew, was completely enthralled with the Shell system. So he adopted it for the whole of the civil service in Singapore. The whole of the government of Singapore studied and applied the Shell system. He got the same people that was developed this. They went to Singapore and they adopted it the whole time he was developing the country. And that's why that country, one of the reasons why Singapore has done really well is because they focus on talent development. And they use the same system called the CEP system, the Shell system. There's a lot of material written on how this played a very big part on the development of Singapore as a nation, actually.
Now let's talk about this idea of being, exposed or being made to work with different bosses, which actually is a nice segue into the third rule, which is what you call broadening experiences. This idea that every once in a while, both for you as an individual, to try to maybe find opportunities to explore maybe other areas of the business, slightly different projects maybe, but also then as an organization to try to encourage that as leaders, to be able to encourage more exposure to different types of projects, different types of people. Explain to me what's the benefit of doing this?
Yeah. In Shell, we used to call it broadening assignment. Very, very important this is. If you are a marketing person, they will simply say to you, if you have not done sales, you cannot do marketing. You have to have done sales. So the first thing to do is all marketing people must have done sales and vice versa. It's very important. And if you're top talent, if they say, well, you have the potential to become CEO, managing director of the company, they're going to broaden you. You're going to go into sales, you're going to do engineering, you might be doing finance, you might be doing H.A.I.R. I've done all of that, Leon, all sorts of different things. And if you're really, really top in Shell, they will say, you must have an assignment in central office. They need to assess you in central office, and you need to understand how Shell operates from a high vantage point. So you must go there. And I had two assignments in the central office, both in London as well as in The Hague myself. And then they also say, if you are going to be top material, you will have a broadening assignment in a tough environment, very difficult environment. That's when I was sent to Sri Lanka. And the top guys went to Nigeria, and a very difficult hardship environment, very tough. Then when you see how this person cope in a very difficult environment.
How do you then structure that? And the reason why I ask is because, we do a quarterly staff survey at HTBB, the church that I work for. And one of there was a piece of feedback that came back from this recent exercise. And it was essentially asking for that. Obviously, they didn't call it a broadening assignment, but the ask was, how can we begin to think of ways for different members of staff to be placed maybe in different departments every once in a while? So I'm curious, how do you structure something like this within the organization?
The first thing to do is to take your top jobs, every manager job in the organization, plus the mission critical job. You have to ask them the question, who are the top talents that you are planning to do those jobs? Not just here, but next year and the following year. You plan it. You have to plan for people to go and do it. Now, the thing is this. You do not want the same people doing the same job for a very, very long time, because then they become stagnant. So you do need to rotate people around. The worst thing that happens in most organizations is the bosses want to keep the best people to themselves, because I can rely on this person, he can deliver the job or she can deliver the job. I'm not going to assign them elsewhere. But you do need a planning process that deliberately say, I'm going to do what we call in Shell flux. Okay. Flux means moving people around, so that then the best way to transfer new ideas into a new company is to bring new people there from different divisions. And you'll find this, what we find most interesting is people who are the same department, they were used to doing things exactly the same way. But if you bring someone from outside into that, they will always come with some very fresh perspective. That's what we call idea flux, bringing in new people. I can tell you 99% of companies actually want the best people, the same people to stay in the same job because they don't worry about them anymore. And actually that's stagnation. You must allow for flux, moving people around. So that's why in Shell, when we assess people, the higher you are in terms of potential, the more assignment you'll have for broadening. No more than 4 years in a job, 3 to 4 years max. Otherwise, that is for people who are having the headroom to grow. But there are people who absolutely don't want. There are people who says, I have no desire to become a manager. I only intend to become a specialist. That's okay too. In fact, I can tell you one real example. When I was in Shell Miri, a gentleman by the name of Daulat Mamura, Malay chap, very, very bright. Everybody said this guy has the potential to rise to become petroleum engineering manager and eventually technical director and possibly even managing director. He has the potential. But you know what he said? I have no desire to do any of the above. I just want to be a petroleum engineer.
Clear true north.
Very clear true north. And we didn't believe him. Every year when we assess them, we all encourage Daulat. Daulat, you have the potential. We want to send you for broadening assignment to do other things. Go and do HR, do IT, do planning, do economics and other things. No, I don't want to do that. I have no desire to do that. You know, after so long, we've tried to convince the man. He resigned. He resigned. You know where he went? He went to Austin, Texas to become a professor and lecturer in petroleum engineering.
Yeah.
And he migrated to US. He just said, look, I cannot stay in a company that does not reward me enough for being a specialist because he really wanted to dive deep. So I think it's the key aspect of broadening assignment, but there are casualties, as I said, people who don't want to do that. So therefore, for people who have no desire to go and rise at the corporate ladder, you then must allow for that to happen too.
Yeah.
I'm just saying broadening assignment is important, but don't force everybody.
Yeah.
And you have to accept people who are wanting to be specialists and that's very specialized in the field. But
so in your case, the broadening assignment here is you use a high level of competence and potential as your litmus test for whether or not someone should be placed on some sort of broadening assignment. Is there also a flip to that where people who are maybe underperforming in a particular department, a particular area, does that also potentially does someone like that also potentially become a candidate for a broadening exercise because you see them underperforming in this area and perhaps you identify it as a mismatch?
Totally. In fact, we found the term we used in Shell was square peg and round hole.
Okay, yeah.
And so that's a term which once you say this person is a square peg and round hole, you then find a square for that person to go. Don't put him in the round hole. And so normally when you have planners, human resource planners, these are people that look at the competence of the person and say, well, that kind of role is probably well suited for an individual. We find people, when you put them in the right jobs, they thrive actually. And so therefore, the broadening assignment may well be the avenue to get the best, to discover the best use of those talents.
What if someone is listening to this and they're thinking, well, I mean, this all sounds great, but they might call themselves small fry, right? I can't make some of these decisions. It's up to my management. It's up to H.A.I.R to decide. And what if maybe you're in an environment where you don't see the leadership putting in place these measures intentionally? What can someone do then if you're in this kind of environment and you can't call the shots?
Yeah, you have to do 3 things. The first thing to do is tell your immediate supervisor that you do want to have a broadening assignment. Make it very explicit.
Yeah.
And if your supervisor, after a while, have not done it, go and see your manager. Really, seriously go and see a manager. If the manager doesn't do it, then you go and see the big boss, like the CEO. If they don't do it, then you have to apply for another job elsewhere. Frankly speaking, we talked about in the first part, it's very important, be the CEO of your own career, but give the organization enough opportunity to make the change based on your request. That's very important. And so, I mean, broadening assignment is used very, very much in Google. I check what Google is doing. They have a rotational program in Google. It's called Associate Product Manager. They call it the APM program. In Google, all the guys are going through various jobs of exposure. The staff go into engineering, they are into marketing, they're into operations. There is building the breadth so that people in Google are really multi-skilled and multi-dimensional in the work that they do. And that's what they do. They call it the APM, Associate Product Manager Program within Google, and that's how Unilever does the same thing. They call it ULIP, ULIP, the Unilever Leadership Internship Program. They rotate them around, and so they follow exactly what we talked about before, the 70-20-10 rule. And because they know that's the way to do it, they assign coach for people for the 20%, and then learning by doing, by assigning them different roles as well. And they do that. And the classroom training, they do send them for training, specific insights so that they pick new things, new learning skills. Frankly speaking, when I went from H.A.I.R into sales, I've never done sales before. And so suddenly I was put there to become retail sales. I was in charge of Shell station in the whole of Klang Valley. I was in H.A.I.R at that time. So straight away, I was the manager in charge of all the petrol station in Klang Valley, as well as Malacca, and some, at that time. And so there was a risk because we said, how can this guy come suddenly become the boss here? But they said, obviously, Shell said, this guy has the potential. We take the risk. We know he can do it. In no time, I was able to do that. And then I think I did the job for 1.5 years. I was promoted to become the National Retail Sales Manager. So coming from H.A.I.R, but you got to take some risks. And therefore, I was in 1.5 years, I was promoted from area manager to the National Retail Sales Manager. And after that, and then I was posted to London to become the global guy. And so you can see that if you are prepared to put people, I was put to do, business re-engineering, so many different roles. So I think the broadening assignment is absolutely key. And I think that is very, very important. I would say today, if any one of you are CEOs of a company, please make sure to do 3 things. Mission critical jobs, put your best people in those mission critical jobs. Number 2, assess the talent, the potential of your best people, and then give them broadening assignment. Because if you start broadening them, they will fulfill their potential. If you don't broaden them, they become very narrow and they cannot grow. They cannot embrace the growth mindset. And they will never achieve their potential if they're just stuck doing the same thing year in and year out. The worst thing that can happen to them, they play the role of diminishing. And the other thing is that they will leave. And such a loss of talent.
You talked about the right fit in terms of individuals playing the right roles. But now let's look at it from a team standpoint. So the other rule is about then putting and basically assembling the right teams. And earlier before we recorded this, we were kind of discussing then what are the key kind of archetypes that you want to have in your team. Maybe talk us through some of those things.
Yeah. Normally in any organization, you will have big projects. And projects are the best opportunity to get the right blend of people in those projects. You have the analytical type of people, the people have the helicopter quality and the analysis, imagination, and then those guys have grounded practical realities. You got a mix of people with those kinds of skills. And also, Spotify is a very good example. They have in Spotify, they have what's called a squad model. The squad model is when they take functional teams and put them for very specific things in their projects. So the marketing folks are out there, the technical people are out there. They come together, the creative to really come in. They call it the squad model. And so they get the really best mix of people. In football, Leon, that's why you have strikers, you have defenders, you have goalkeepers. Very nice mix of people. You can't have strikers playing all of the strikers in the role, nobody to defend. Sure, you lose. So you really, really have to apply this. In particular, if you have key initiatives in your organizations that you are relying on them to achieve your big true north targets, that's when you get your squad model, the best mix of people inside there. You have the analytical part, the folks that know how to communicate, the folks that know how to do juggling many different things, ruthless prioritization, the very disciplined type of people. You have the mix of those people. Yeah. The hard-nosed people are inside there. The energizers are inside there. You need the mixed people.
Yeah, the way I like to see it is, every team, first of all, you need to have, it's a bit like your hair thing, but obviously it's unrealistic to expect that everyone can have all of that. So, you almost have to have someone who has a knack for strategy. So you have your strategist. Yeah. And this is someone who's able to kind of analyze the situation, see a way forward, and have a kind of vision for what needs to be done. But sometimes the strategist might not necessarily be the best communicator of that vision. And that's why you need someone who's then able to translate that into a message that is compelling, both for the team as well as your stakeholders, but then ultimately for your clients, maybe for your customers as well. This could be a comms person, or sometimes not necessarily a comms person, but just someone within the team who's able to just communicate clearly. Then you need to have, obviously, a technical person, someone who can really do the stuff, because you can have great vision, you can be able to communicate that vision, but if you can't deliver, it's just a song and dance and there's no result. So then you obviously need a technical person on the team. Then the next person is you need someone who is able to close. So this is maybe more in relation to sales. You're selling an idea. The communicator can talk. The technical person can explain how this is going to be done. But then you also ultimately need someone who's able to say, well, this is how we get this thing over the line. So someone with a bit of a closing tendency. And then finally, I think in all of this, you also need someone who plays a bit of the role of a diplomat. Yeah. Personally, I feel like this is my leaning because the diplomat is able to look at all of these things and determine when certain trade-offs need to be made. Yeah. Sometimes the diplomat can also be a technical person because, like we mentioned, sometimes you also need to be able to run the numbers a bit to determine where is your margin for trade-off. But sometimes the diplomat is also someone who just understands human behavior well. And so margin can either be in the way of kind of numerical margin, but sometimes it can also be a margin in terms of how do we get human beings to align with one another. And so I think that's a simple way to think about it. Obviously, the different roles play out differently. But if you imagine these archetypes, try to think about how you can find these archetypes of people in your team. Now, the fifth rule is about then having done all of these things, how do we reward?
Yeah. This is a very important component because if you don't get this right, you have a real problem.
Yeah. So let's start from the level of H.A.I.R and management then.
Yeah. H.A.I.R and management, you have to be very, very clear right in beginning before you do appraisal. You must be clear about the targets. If you're not clear, be fuzzy about the targets, you have a problem assessing the person, whether the person is delivered or not delivered. Most of the problem of organization, the target is fuzzy. Very unclear. Because it's unclear, you can't say whether the guy delivered it. And the other thing is that if the target is so realistic, so low, if it's lower than last year's, obviously the person will overperform. So target setting is very, very important right at the beginning. It must be put in a manner that is stretched, that is unfuzzy, that's clear, that's easy to assess. Though the assessment is quite specific. The more clear the target is, the easier it is for you to assess. No if, no but. So that's, I think. So the moment you are clear about the way in which they appraise it, that's when you link the reward to those people who delivered it. You must give them the right bonus. You must give them the right promotions for those people who delivered it. And you shouldn't be shy. Announce it to everybody. So the best thing is if you are shy to say that such and such, that means you're not clear about your performance appraisal. And everybody should know that this person deserves to be promoted. That's why they're there. They may not like it, but they all accept that that person deserves to be promoted. So I think that's key for you. The other one is the consequence management. Those people who don't deliver it, you must also call them out. Call them out for two things. Call them out for improvement. The PIP, performance improvement.
Hot topic.
Hot topic.
Because a lot of people, and I've seen many examples of where this is really played out as such. Sometimes the PIP, its intent is good because you're not saying, well, you're not performing and therefore we're just going to axe you. The PIP assumes that people have the potential to be able to improve. And therefore, if someone is underperforming, you put them on a PIP to ensure, ideally, that they do improve and that they develop. But there are also many examples of where the PIP is simply used as a way to cold storage somebody and persuade them to leave the job themselves. And because of that, I think there's just generally a very negative, there's a stigma around the PIP. And there's almost this sense of as soon as you propose a PIP or a PIP, that's the end of my career. So, what's a good way to approach a PIP in a way that is meaningful?
You must begin with a very positive idea right from beginning. You are giving the person a real chance at improving. The only way you can do that to the person, to tell that person very clearly, unequivocally that we are not happy with your performance and these are the specific areas. Don't be fuzzy about it. Because if your targets are very clear and and then you can tell them example. Because the guy said, well, give me example. Said so and so. Your colleague has got the same target and that person has been able to deliver it. Don't talk to me about it. Talk to him or her. Because this is the person that knows how to achieve the results. So that is how to help them. So you can tell people, if you can work with so and you assign that person to help this. He really genuinely wanted that person to improve. I have in my time, Leon, we do this, people at the bottom 10%, they're not performing, and we tell them, you can perform, and you know what they said? How do I improve in my job? And if you can tell them, the best person is your neighbor, and this person knows how to do it, he has exactly the same target, he will tell you how to do it. And if you work and follow the method, I'm pretty sure that you will be as good as well. And many of them really turn around. And so you must begin with a positive attitude to really make them improve. But of course, if this person is not bothering to learn, not bothering to apply, then after you giving them one more chance to go and do it, and you tell this is the final chance. And if you don't achieve this, you're out of here,
Yeah. And I think also, just to maybe if you are someone who happens to be on a PIP or you are being proposed a PIP, I think another thing that you can hold your HR or your management accountable to is to also ensure that those measures that will be put in place to ensure your development, that those are very clearly stated in writing as well. So, for example, you talked about, I think that's good, right? So one of the things, we do this as well, is kind of almost like a mentor pairing. So as part of the PIP, we say that if this is a specific area of improvement, we will also assign you somebody who will be able to coach you in this particular area. And then we institutionalize that by mandating whatever the rhythm is, whether it's a weekly, daily rhythm with this person, and the other person also has to agree to it, so that they are held accountable to ensuring that they are providing that face time to coach. But then the other thing is also, maybe you can even ask, if you're in a PIP, well, if there's a certain area that I need development in, and if there's nobody in-house that can provide that training, then is there a way that you can ask management to then provide maybe external training? And this is one of the things that we did for someone who was on a PIP previously. Well, we said that we would cover certain training in a particular area, external training, but it won't be at the individual's cost. We will pay for the training. And that shows a genuine intent to want to help someone improve. And therefore, that means that if you are on a PIP, that's something that you can hold your management accountable for. But if you are management, it also shows that you can say, well, here are the things that we did put in place, but despite this, you didn't improve, and therefore it's very clear now that despite the measures put in place, there was no improvement, and therefore it's a bit easier to make a very honest assessment of the person.
Yeah. I was looking at some example of really, I wouldn't say weird, but really out of the box ideas.
Okay.
It's Netflix.
Yeah.
In Netflix, they link this into consequence management. They call it the keeper test.
Keeper test. Okay.
They said this keeper test model in Netflix is that if a manager does not fight to keep the employee in his department, that person is immediately considered to be a no good for the whole Netflix. If your manager is not fighting to keep you there, you are immediately put on the list for severance payment. And so, because that way in which they keep the very best people in the organization. And so, but they always want to rotate them around. So if you want to rotate the person, gladly move the person around, not fighting for them, they're on the list to leave actually. I am told quite reliably by people who work in McKinsey, at the senior level in McKinsey, they have this thing called up or out. If you are not rising within McKinsey, that means you're stagnating. Your role is to leave. They can't keep you to, nobody stagnate there. You up or out. No staying sideways, no staying put. And so this is a similar idea of the keeper test.
Harsh.
Very
but
harsh.
As we often say, pressure is also privilege, isn't it? And sometimes that is what also a multiplier does. A multiplier is not simply an encourager, but also someone who is able to then apply some healthy pressure as well where needed. If the intent of being able to multiply someone or to multiply yourself as a contributor is to be able to see exponential growth, then sometimes we need to find ways to engineer a slight level of discomfort, but a healthy discomfort that will help us to achieve that, forcing us to do things differently, as you say, and out of that, forcing us to be able to innovate and really develop and to really deliver. Sometimes the best delivery comes in the fire and in the furnace.
And the one thing, Leon, I found completely quite shocking, because I worked in Shell International for a very long time in the corporate world. When I would join the government, it was quite shocking for me to discover in the government, Malaysian government, there's no such thing as terminating an employee for poor performance. If the person doesn't do well, there's no such thing as terminating them unless they do a misconduct. For poor performance, they don't do it. So they're just there, So if the person doesn't do the job, doesn't deliver, they're just there. The only thing I knew, they do what's called cold storage. So they call it temporary parking. They put senior people into jobs that are not real job, no real assignment, so that they look at themselves only, and after a long time, they probably leave. And this is a terrible thing to do. And I believe that I have seen so many examples when I was in civil service. People are not doing their jobs. People are not doing it, and people don't remove them. I can tell you in Shell, when I was there, many of those people who have gone long time ago, if you don't deliver, and time and again you don't deliver, you're out of there. No ways. The people will put it through PIP, and if you don't deliver based on the target, you're out. But in the government, I found this to be true in other governments as well, not just in Malaysia. Many other governments have this problem. In governments, they just stay there, they don't do the job, they continue to do that. So I think consequence management is very important. But the flip side is reward. You must reward people who are delivering results. The more you deliver results, the more promotion you should give to those people, the more reward you should grant to them. But one of the biggest problems with reward is this thing called the pissing off exercise. The bell curve. And everyone who's been at a company long enough, and every organization have this bell curve. The top 5% get the most bonus, the next 30% get slightly less than that 5%, and the remaining people 7. the remaining people, the majority of the folks get the normal merit increment and normal bonus. So that means 70% of the folks, they are pissed off every year. And so this thing is a big problem for many, many people. But because the organization have to do a bell curve, because if you don't do a ranking bell curve, you know what people do? They are nice to their employees. They rate everybody as if they are superheroes in performance. And they're actually not delivering results, but performance appraisals are good. When you look at this, the problem with all this stems from very poor target setting. Right from the beginning, the targets were fuzzy. When the targets are fuzzy, and then all the superlative words to say that person has performed well, good relationship with customers, all the good stuff, then the problem is, how do you then reward people who are supposed to be your top performers? Because the performance all very good. That's why people do ranking. Most organizations do ranking. And when they do the ranking, they really rank them on the basis of the bell curve. 5%, then the remaining maybe 25%, that's for 30, and the remaining 30. And then sometimes they do the bottom 10. In General Electric, during the Jack Welch time, they force rank people to the bottom 10. So if you are in the bottom 10 in the ranking, you're also out. And that's a very, very robust way to do it.
One of the ways that we counter this thing, it's almost like this career death by niceness, is by 360 feedback is one. But obviously, even with 360 feedback, your panel of people that you select to provide 360 feedback, you can obviously choose your best friends at work who will write you rave reviews about your performance. But one way to counter that is that we encourage our teams, we set an expectation for who are the types of people that you need in your 360 panel. So you obviously need someone senior above you, so that most likely that would be a direct kind of report or manager to provide feedback there within your team. Then either a peer or someone under you, still within your team. But obviously, even these two people could, if you get along very well with your boss, then your boss is also maybe a bit more likely to write some really nice, wax lyrical about how wonderful you are. Similarly, a peer, or even if it's someone under you, then there might be some power dynamics that would make it a bit awkward for them to be completely honest about feedback. So recognizing this, we then say you need to have then another two people. So the other two people has to be in a similar way, someone a bit more senior than you, but someone from a different department than you. And then the fourth person, either a peer or someone junior, but also from another department. And that ensures, because most likely, most of the points of tension or friction will come from those cross-departmental interactions. And because they're a bit less proximate to you, they're probably more likely to call you out on things and be a bit more willing to give open and honest feedback. But how do we also ensure that it's not also an opportunity for people to sabotage one another? We pair this with monthly teaching on feedback. We talk a lot about having a healthy feedback culture. So we teach very regularly in our town halls about how to give, but also how to receive feedback. And we encourage people to ask for feedback. And once you start to normalize this practice of giving good feedback, you are less likely to simply try to sabotage someone, because you now have the vocabulary for being able to do that well. And in fact, ability to give and receive feedback is also one of the kind of pillars that we attach some of our performance appraisals to. So if you don't give good feedback and don't receive feedback well, then that also implicates your overall score, because we mark people, or we appraise people both in terms of hard skills and competencies, but we also appraise them then based on their ability to live out and adopt the culture. And we have these 5 culture values. And so within that, the ability to give and receive feedback. We have a culture value called humility. And so that is a key component as well to ensure that it is fair game both ways.
Just in case there are many listeners out there who are Christians, they think that when we talk about consequence management, they think that we are so robust about it and unkind, perhaps. I just want to point that even Jesus Christ talked about reward and consequence management. That's in the parable of the talents. In Matthew 25:14-30, it's very clear. The master, according to Jesus, he went on a journey and he entrusted his servants. He gave each of them, the first servant, he gave him 5 talents. The second servant, he gave talents, a coin equivalent. The second one received 2 talents, and the third servant received 1 talent. After he came back from his journey, he asked them, what did you do? Where did you invest it? The first 2 doubled it, and he rewarded them amply because they really invested, they worked hard and delivered it. But the last person, he said, oh, you master, you have been I'm very worried about you in case I may lose it. So all I did was I buried the coin, and then I made sure that I returned you the coin. He did not multiply. Actually, in that parable, that guy, the master took the person and threw him into the wild, and then he cast him out completely. And this is consequence management, and this is Jesus Christ talking about it. So in the kingdom, there is a place for reward. There's also a place for consequence management.
And also a place for multiplication.
Yes.
That is an
The first
example.
2.
That's a story of multiplication, isn't it?
Absolutely.
We do have a duty to be able to multiply. And, if we use that example, the multiplication is both, at an individual level. If you are simply playing a game of addition, the addition assumes that you are just adding to your own skill set, or you are trying to hoard to have more. But in order to multiply, you then have to think, well, how can I utilize what is given to me? Whether it is, in this case, talents is referring to a physical kind of coin, but we can also look at it as just our giftings.
Yeah.
If we are given particular gifts, then how are we then also being able to pour out those gifts for the benefit of others? Now, in a business sense, then we see that as value. If the work that you are doing is with the intent to not only better yourself and add to your skill set, but in order to then create value for others, both for your managers, for your peers, in the way that you manage upwards, in the way that you manage downwards as well, then you add value, and that is what creates exponential growth. Our pastor, H.A.I.R, often says that success is not simply ladder climbing, but in fact it is ladder carrying. So in the things that we do, how can we not only climb, but also ensure that we are carrying ladders for other people to climb? And when we all climb together, that is how we ensure that there is multiplication and ultimately exponential growth. Exponential growth for yourself as an individual, but ultimately exponential growth for your company, for your church, for your community as well. But I think these are some practical principles, and obviously it's not exhaustive, because different companies, different people at different seasons of their careers, but also different businesses have different needs, which goes back to rule number 1 about why it's important to establish a very clear true north.
Yeah.
Because depending on your true north, depending on your vision, then some of these things might be different. So we hope that by giving you some of these ideas for what we believe are helpful ways to create an environment for growth will be helpful to you, both as leaders who are able to make decisions. If you are already doing these things, then great. But if not, hopefully this gives you some ideas of things that you can begin to implement for your teams. But for those of us who are maybe not in positions of leadership, who aren't able to make these calls, then hopefully it gives you either a bit of an idea of whether or not you are in the right place to begin with. If you're looking for a job, then these are some things that you can look for as well. Clarity of vision, clear roadmaps as well for growth. These are things that you can now take ownership of, to look out for, to decide whether or not to join a particular company, whether or not to get onto a particular project for your own growth and development. So with that, thank you for joining us for yet another episode of The Game of Impossible. If you liked this conversation, we record episodes and we upload episodes weekly every Friday at 6 a.m. We also have short form content on both our IG and TikTok at The Game of Impossible. Thank you for joining us again, and we'll see you next week. Take care.